value stream mapping, the chain link. The chain link is the interconnectedness between functional areas, functional departments in your organization. And what we tend to do traditionally is look at just one or two functional areas and make improvement just in one little area of what is a value stream instead of connecting everything together and having it be much more of a customer-facing activity. So when we look at processes just in terms of one functional area, it tends to be very internally focused. And we tend to make decisions that may be good for the business, but maybe not so good from a customer perspective. And ultimately, when you look at work from the customer's perspective, you'll find that a large part of what you've been doing isn't really so good for the business either. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then just a little bit about my background. I'm not going to go into the whole thing again because you can obviously read, but one thing that I was saying is that we do lean transformation work in all types of businesses, all levels of the journey, and all size and all industries, which means that we've gotten a lot of experience in looking at how organizations are using value stream mapping appropriately and how they are not using value stream mapping appropriately. So that's part of what drove Mike and I to write the book. So as far as the topics today, we'll talk about leadership and how to engage leaders much more intensely in value stream mapping. We'll talk about the yin and the yang of scoping and how big to go. It's easy to go too big. It's also easy to go too narrow, so there's a sweet spot in the middle there. Who are the right people to have on the team and what level in the organization they should be. The traits and skills of your facilitator. What the charter is all about. It's much more than a planning tool. And how to make sure that everyone is prepared, because the planning stage of value stream mapping is actually likely the most important stage to make sure you have a successful value stream mapping activity. And Mike Osterling is going to be delivering a webinar, I think it's at the end of next month or the beginning of March, on the actual mechanics of value stream mapping. This webinar is going to focus on all of the upfront piece on how to prepare for the activity because it's vital for the success. So, value streams. What the heck are value streams? Well, value streams are all of the activities that you undergo in order to transform a request into some sort of a good or a service. So it's typically looked at as an external customer's request, although there are support value streams where there's an internal customer. And you can also think of a value stream as a value stream segment if you want to take a smaller chunk of a very, very large value stream. So one of the things that's interesting to look at is where does a value stream begin and where does it end? Well, in many cases it has no true beginning and no true end, and they can go on and on in both directions. So one of the tricks in planning for value stream mapping is setting appropriate fence posts so that they're broad enough that you can see what's really going on at a macro level, but they're narrow enough that you can actually get something accomplished in a minimum amount of days. So what's different about value stream mapping and process mapping is that value stream mapping is a very, very high-level view of the work. So what's really wonderful about value stream mapping and makes it such a powerful tool is that when you get above the work and you look down upon the work, you're able to see gaps, disconnects, and redundancies in a clearer, easier way than when you get mired up in the weeds, which if you jump straight to process level mapping, you tend to get kind of tangled up in those weeds. And so value stream mapping, we recommend highly that it's a first step before any major improvement activity. Sometimes you can go straight to process level mapping if it's something very, very small, but you really reap a lot of benefits by taking the time to start at the value stream level and set an improvement strategy. And then from that, some parts of the value stream may need to be, and often need to be, process level mapped. So high level view, 60,000 foot view, macro view, strategic view. That's what value stream mapping is. So if you think about work, any kind of work that you do, there are these different levels of granularity from macro to micro. So a value stream consists of a series of processes, and every process consists of a series of steps. So again, value stream mapping is the strategic, the macro view, and because of that, it needs to have heavy, heavy leadership involvement. And process level mapping has heavy frontline involvement because it's the tactical. So it's the what and the how. That's the difference between value stream mapping and process level mapping. And Mike and I see lots and lots of maps, value stream maps, that are really process maps. And you can tell based on not only the physical format of the map, but also looking at each of the blocks on the map, you can tell if it's showing macro level workflow and handoffs, or is it showing all the little micro steps that someone undergoes within a process. That's how you can tell if you're at the right level or not. Then the other reason why we do value stream mapping, which I already alluded to, is that typically when we look at work from a siloed perspective, we'll get, one department may get really, really good at spitting out work, high quality work, efficiently doing the work, but yet if it's not connected to the next department in the chain, then it's not really going to help the value stream. It may help the people doing the work, and that's good, but it's not going to necessarily help the customer who's the recipient at the end of a value stream of that good or service. So you get a bit of sub-optimization. Again, all improvement is helpful, but wouldn't it be great to have it be helpful to all parties involved? So value stream mapping enables us to look at things holistically and get all the people in the boat rowing at the same pace so that you don't have a bunch of queues and missed opportunities and constraints and things like that. So again, thinking about strategy versus tactics, because these two words are often very confused and they're often misused, frankly. So here's a very, kind of clear example that we've all lived that shows strategy versus tactics. So strategically, let's just say we want to go on a trip. We have to decide where we're going to go. So I live here in San Diego. I'm going to pretend like I'm leaving on a trip, and I have to decide whether I want to go to, for example, Portland, or maybe I want to go to Chicago. Hi, Tony, in Chicago. Or maybe I want to go to Houston. So strategically, I have to make that decision. Where do I want to go? Now, let's say that I decide I'm going to go to Chicago and see Tony. Then I have to decide, well, am I going to take I-80 if I'm driving, I-40, or I-70? That is a kind of a mid-level strategic decision. That also could be part of a value stream map. What's not part of a value stream map is, let's say I get, I choose I-80 and I get cranking along and there's a detour, and then I have to figure out whether to go here or there, or I decide I want to stop and see some site along the way. Those are micro-level decisions and micro-level details that are more along the lines of a process-level map. So macro decisions and macro, the path you take, that's what's on a value stream map. And by the way, for those of you who may be going, oh gosh, maybe I'm not doing value stream maps, please know that you're not alone. That's why we wrote the book. I'm in the middle of interviewing some people for my team, and these are highly seasoned lean people, very, very successful lean people. And when I ask them to submit value stream maps in order, to just start the conversation on how we may view it differently, many of the maps I've gotten are, kind of edging toward process level maps. Not all of them, but several of them are. So it's not something that I think before now has been well defined and has enabled people that are, bright, seasoned people to really get right. So that's again another reason why we wrote the book. So then another thing about value stream mapping, again very different from process level mapping, is that you're looking to reach leadership consensus. Again, strategically, you want leaders to say yes for the current state. Yes, this is how we operate, and get agreement around that. And then for the future state design, yes, this is how we want to operate. And when you get all of the major functional leaders across a value stream agreeing on the future state design, imagine how much more smoothly improvement goes because you've got an alignment at the top. Because a lot of what happens in improvement is you'll get into some sort of a A3 problem-solving approach or a Kaizen event or just even a traditional project, and a team will be going merrily down the way, and then a leader will say, whoa, 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 wait a minute, what? No, I don't agree with that, and things get derailed very commonly because of that. So this is a step-by-step approach that enables smooth execution when you get to the actual improvement. So what does a value stream map look like more or less? Well, this is an extremely simplified version of a value stream map to illustrate the three main sections of a value stream map. And one could argue that if it doesn't have all three sections, it's not a value stream map. So the first section at the top is information flow. And in the knowledge and service work world, in offices, it tends to be IT system related. So, and that's true in most environments nowadays, but it used to be that there was a lot more manual telling people what to do and manual schedules and things like that. So most of the work we do now is in IT systems. And if the arrow points into the system, that means data is entered into. If the arrow points out of the IT system, that means the process uses that information to do their work. And then there's the workflow. What's the actual work that goes through the system, whether it's physical work as in a manufacturing production line, or whether it's electronic work, or some sort of information that's being passed verbally even. Sometimes that happens in a value stream. That goes across the value stream. And then you have a timeline. And I'm not going to go into the details on the key metrics. Mike will cover that in his webinar. And if you're dying to know and don't want to wait for the webinar, you can always go on my website, ksmartin.com, and I've got all kinds of webinars there that talk through the metrics. All right, so that's the basic section of a current state value stream map. And then for future state, the only difference is that you end up having these Kaizen bursts on the map, and the Kaizen bursts are the high-level, strategically stated improvements that need to occur in order for this future state to become the current state. So notice that these Kaizen bursts say error-proof, standard work, cross-train, very high level. It doesn't say create a checklist for standard work or create a visual standard operating procedure document. It doesn't say exactly how it's going to be error-proofed. It doesn't say exactly who's going to be cross-trained and on what. But what it does show is that in order to get from this 5-step value stream, so there are 5 processes in the value stream, that now we're going to 3 handoffs, or 2 handoffs if you, 1, 2. In order for those to occur and that become the reality of the current state, these Kaizen bursts have to be implemented. The baton gets passed between leaders and the front lines, who are the people best suited to do the tactical design, testing, and implementing the improvements that it takes in order to realize this future state. So, most organizations don't have a very clear line in the sand at all between strategy and tactics. Most of the time, leaders get mired in tactics because they're trying to fight fires at a tactical level instead of letting the front lines handle the work that they're the most expert to do. And sometimes the front lines will think that they really deserve to be making strategic decisions, and it really behooves an organization to keep each function or each level in the organization in that rightful place with a blurred line toward middle management. So hopefully that makes sense for some of you, and if it doesn't for the rest of you, feel free to drop an email or something to get me to clarify that. But it's very common in organizations that leaders don't have enough time to set strategy, and the front lines aren't engaged enough in actually making change to the work that they do. Very common, and that's another reason why we seek value stream mapping, is to solve that. So at the end of a value stream mapping activity, then you'll have some current state metrics that are high-level metrics and some projected future state metrics based on a team's knowledge of the work and what they think the improvements will yield, and then projected improvements. Again, all of this is projected until you make improvements and actually are able to see the results of that. So this is not so simple of a value stream map, but this is far more common on the kinds of value stream mapping activities I get called in for. They tend to be more complex. They tend to be big. So from, say, an RFQ coming in all the way through to billing a client, no matter what the industry, or in the case of healthcare, the entire patient flow process, including the revenue piece of it. Those kinds of big value streams are what I and my team tend to get called in for. So your value stream map may not look anywhere near as complex as this, but I wanted to show a couple things on a complex map how this, so imagine a world in which the entire way you operate is on one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper or legal size at the biggest. And that's exactly what this is. This happens to be a software developer. They make custom software, that's their product. And it is a big, long process. So 4.5 months in order to get all the way from concept to billing a client. And here you've got the customer in the middle and you've got this full loop. So this doesn't happen without a fair amount of planning up front and getting the right people on the team to get this high-level view of work on one sheet of paper. Now, a couple things I want to clear up. Flowcharts are highly valuable for one thing and one thing only, and it's teaching people how to think and teaching them what decisions they need to make and teaching them when they make the decision where work should flow. They are not at all appropriate for making improvement because there's no metrics, right? You don't know how this process is performing. You don't know where the quality is or if there is quality. You don't know how long it's taking to do any of this. All it's telling you is that this is the branching you take when you get to a fork in the road. And they're very, very valuable for that. But we have to get away from this thinking that process flow charts are even remotely appropriate to be making improvement from, because they're not. You've got to have metrics in order to improve. So, so metrics-based process mapping, a technique that Mike and I put together many years back, gets us to swim lanes, but swim lanes alone are also not sufficient for making improvement, but adding metrics are. The point is that flowcharts are not value stream maps, and so value stream maps should have very few branches on them. Okay, very few. You can have a few, but very few branches on them, and they should have no swim lanes. This means that scoping has to be very carefully done, which we're about to get into. PDCA or PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Adjust, Plan, Do, Check, Act, is the scientific methodology for making improvements, solving problems, designing new products, etc. And I wanted to just set the context for those of you who are very familiar with operating with that mindset, that the value stream mapping activity as a whole is a macro PDSA. And by the way, for those of you who might be familiar with strategy deployment, or Hoshin-Conry as it's also called, there's even a macro circle outside of this, a macro PDSA cycle that's the Hoshin plan for the year, the strategic deployment plan for the year. And value stream mapping may be one thing that has to be done in order to execute that plan. But let's say you aren't doing it based on a strategy deployment plan and you just decide that there's a value stream that needs to be improved, then you've got PDSA as a macro cycle within which there is an execution stage where you're executing the transformation plan that comes out of value stream mapping, and then even a more micro cycle of making specific improvements via projects, Kaizen events, mini A3s, those kinds of things. So, and it goes on. I mean, there's even a more micro one inside there. This is, one of those fractal kinds of concepts where there are many, many different levels of PDSA in making improvement. So, the value stream mapping piece of it becomes vital. The planning part of value stream mapping becomes vital in order to make sure that you're able to get all the way through to the actual improvements. So the way that we like to think of it is having the mapping activity be 3 consecutive days. And again, you may already be starting to think about this. Whoa, didn't she say leaders? 3 consecutive days? How are we going to do that? Do it all the time. So you have to understand how to sell this and how to sell them on the benefit of this. And once they've done it once, they will truly understand the value of it, and you'll be good to go for any future value stream mapping activities. But what I want to talk about in this webinar is the 4 weeks or 6 weeks sometimes prior to mapping, what has to be done. Mike will focus on these consecutive days within the mapping activity. So we would like to view it in 3 kind of in 6 steps, where you engage an executive sponsor, you draft a charter, you socialize the charter, you plan the logistics, including going to the Gemba or going where the work is actually done, gather some upfront data, not a whole lot, but just a little bit, and then deliver a value stream mapping overview before you get the team together to do the actual mapping on those 3 days. Now let's talk about, first of all, the accountable parties, including the executive sponsor. So the executive sponsor sometimes you need to coach executive sponsors on what it means to be an executive sponsor. They're typically VPs or higher in an organization, and they are ultimately accountable for results, which means that they don't necessarily get involved with value stream mapping and then turn their head to other concerns and not see the transformation plan through and make sure that people are executing on that plan. They're involved all the way through to the final piece of that plan that's being implemented. And then, of course, ideally, you start all over again with more improvement to the value stream. They need to attend briefings, which I'll talk about in just a bit, at the end of the days of mapping. And they need to ideally have authority over a significant portion of the value stream. So this is tricky because in many organizations that are very siloed, you've got VPs over very narrow parts of the organization, and you don't really have one person that oversees the whole value stream until you get to the CEO. And in most organizations, the CEO is not going to be the appropriate person to have as an executive sponsor for value stream mapping. So you have to pick. You have to pick someone who has the passion for it and has the bandwidth to focus on it and who has influence, if not direct, line responsibility over a significant portion of the value stream. A value stream champion is also helpful. That's a step or two lower than the executive sponsor as the go-to person. The value stream champion is actually on the team. They oversee the entire value stream process from a tactical level, making sure that the team's where they need to be, it's time they need to be, and all that. And sometimes in a very small company, the executive sponsor and the value stream champion can be one and the same. In a larger company, they typically are two different people. And then the facilitator for value stream mapping is very critical. I mean, facilitators are always critical, but for value stream mapping, because you're talking about a leadership-heavy team, that facilitator has to have additional skills that someone facilitating a Kaizen event may not necessarily need if they're dealing with front lines. So they need to have some mechanical, technical information as well as a lot of team dynamics, and ideally they have no skin in the game. They're not part of the value stream being improved. They're objective because they're not part of it. So in terms of the things to think about is, there's 3 main areas under the technical umbrella. They need to understand mapping mechanics. How do you actually construct a map? What are the key metrics you use and how do you get them? And what are the potential countermeasures for the future state should you find that the current state has ample opportunity for improvement and ample problems, which they typically do. They also need to have a fairly good handle on, human psychology, team dynamics. How do you deal with mediating a VP level disagreement over the future state direction? How do you counter resistance to change if you've got, a senior director on a team that has his or her heels dug in on the future state and is disagreeing with the rest of the team? Those kinds of things you need to have, some pretty good chops at handling that higher level person having that level of resistance to change. You can't use the same techniques that you use on a frontline person. And then the other thing is just general time management. If you do a 3 consecutive day activity, I tend to get much more intense on day 2 and then even more intense on day 3 with the time. So on day 1, I'll be a little more loose and let the team gel and get stuff accomplished, obviously, but I'll let them go down a few side roads and have conversations that aren't 100% relevant if I see that they're bonding. Whereas on day 2, I get more intense on no, here, let's get back on track, let's get back to scope, let's get back to our mission. And on day 3, there's no deviation. So you have to know how to manage the time across these things. And then also action plan development. It's not just about the map. In fact, one could argue that the main reason to map, the main reason to map is to make improvement. But as far as a deliverable, the main reason to map is to get that action plan. It's not about the maps. The maps are merely a means to that action plan. So you have to have someone that is able to get into the execution mindset and get people jazzed and fired up for executing as well as someone who's more technical and able to actually physically draw the map. So let's talk about the charter. So the charter serves many purposes. It is a planning tool, it's a communication tool, and it's a consensus building tool. And most organizations don't use it well on the communication and consensus building side, and many don't use it very well with planning either. So you can have all kinds of different categories in your charter, but these are the ones that we find are the most helpful in most settings. And what you'll notice is that the left side of the charter is kind of the what and the why. You know, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And then it has a little bit of technical information down here, like what do we need to gather as far as our homework. And then you've got this who, you know, who's going to be involved, and it includes, by the way, a list of briefing attendees. Again, I'll talk about briefings toward the end of the webinar. And then it's got a logistics section of, you know, when are we going to be gathering and where, and is food included, and that type of thing. So those are the three sections of the charter. And I'm not going to go into all the details because you can either read the book or you can just, you know, download the charter by going to ksmartin.com/downloads. There's all kinds of things there, but the charter is one of them, ksmartin.com/downloads, and that will give you the charter. But let's talk just about a couple of sections in the charter. Let's talk first about the what and the why section, and let's talk very specifically about scoping. Most people freak out when they see how narrow you need to go for the current state value stream map, because people want to solve world hunger in 3 days, which is not realistic. So when a client comes to me and says, you know, we need to fix our whole process from an RFQ to delivering product, or we need to fix our whole process, you know, for a patient coming into our outpatient imaging center, or we need to fix a person that's applying for a mortgage. You know, there are lots of reasons to do improvement, and there are lots of reasons why you want to fix every set of conditions under that umbrella that is the target for improvement, but it's not realistic. So for example, if you look at patient care in a, you know, hospital, for example, and let's look at imaging, well, actually, let's look at the whole hospital. You've got, you know, say inpatient care, you might have 3 major categories. You know, you may have 4, you could have OBGYN, you could have a cancer treatment area, and then you could have all kinds of subs of each one of these, and you could have cardiac ICU, and you could have burn units and things like that. It can branch on forever. And then on the outpatient side, this is a fictional, not fictional, it's a real hospital that has a vaccine clinic and imaging and OBGYN outpatient services. But let's say that imaging tends to be the issue. Again, most organizations will want to just solve all of the imaging issues. Well, you may be able to, but for current state mapping, you want to set one specific set of conditions. And in this case, they chose MRIs. Because back to those of you who are familiar with Learning to See, which was written in 1999, they taught us, they meaning Mike Rother and John Shook, taught us how to look at product families. And product families were any set of work that goes through the same process steps. The same thinking applies here. We're just not using the same format. We're using more this tree format to look at the variety of conditions under which work flows to pick a specific set of conditions to map. So your criteria could be anything. It could be picking your highest volume one. It could be the highest margin because you want to fix that and be more profitable. It could be the most painful. It could be the most supportive leadership team, etc. So that's how you look at scoping. Now here's another example for a manufacturing environment. It could be that you have equipment being manufactured, and you could have capital equipment and spares and subassemblies. And then within capital, you could have catalog, config to order, engineer to order, new product development. And then under engineer to order, you could have custom hardware, custom software, or both. And it may be that for any variety of those criteria we mentioned earlier, this is the path the client chooses to map for the current state. So you might be wondering, why does she keep saying for the current state, for the current state? Because with the future state, then this is again the beautiful thing of value stream mapping, we often find that work follows more similar steps than we think. People get really mired in difference instead of looking at similarity. I mean, this is kind of a big philosophical statement, but when you think about it, this is what happens when we have problems with acceptance across cultures, religions, sexual orientation, gender. I mean, you name it. This is because we tend to see things as different instead of similar. And the same kinds of thinking, which is not very helpful, by the way, applies in business, where businesses look at, oh, it's all different, it's this and that, if that, and what happens is you start spinning your wheels and get kind of tangled up in that in the difference instead of looking at similarities. So recently we've done a bunch of value stream mapping because of the book being out. We facilitated, and it's a very narrow scope for the current state, sometimes only 20% of the total work volume going through a value stream. And then when you do the future state, voila, it applies to 80%. And it happens over and over and over. So you have to not be afraid to narrow that scope to get that current state done, and trust that when you design the future state to meet that current state, it's going to apply to a heck of a lot more than that narrow set of conditions. Never seen it not happen. So then the next question is, where should you put your fence posts? So what's going to be your first process block and your last process block on the value stream? There are many, many decision points on what you choose. Let's just say that in this case, a customer decided, or you decide, that you want to start with a customer submitting an RFQ to sales and just kind of forget the whole sales process, generating leads and all that stuff. And let's say that you want to stop at shipping. You don't care about installation afterwards. You don't care about billing, all that stuff. You just want to include those as your fence posts. Then you've defined your fence posts, so you're good to go. Then, so that's scoping on steroids. So plenty more to read about and talk through, and you're welcome to look at my first webinar that I just did on the planning. I do a little bit deeper dive into scoping, but not much more. There's a lot to scoping. Okay, so now who should be on your team? And please feel free to ask questions, by the way, on scoping. Who should be on your team? Well, if you look at the scope again, what we see are, we've got customer, sales, estimating, sales, customer, sales. So let's talk about the customer for a second. It's wildly effective to have a customer on a value stream mapping team if you can get away with it. And what I mean by that is if you've got a customer that you've got a close working relationship with, and it's a loyal customer that's not going to see your dirty laundry and go, ugh, enough with them, I'm going to the competition. It's really, really helpful to have a customer. If you're talking about the customer-facing piece of a value stream, it's wildly effective. Most organizations are very afraid to do it. It does take some strategic decision-making to make it happen, but every time a customer has been on a team, the future state has been far more innovatively designed because of the customer being present. They really help you see things through a different lens. And that includes patients if there's anyone on the line in healthcare. So now there's all these other departments, sales, estimating, customer service, the electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, design area, software development, purchasing, and production. So for those areas, you have to figure out what level in the organization are the people that you should include. So think of an org chart. I'm not a huge org chart fan, but I kind of live and breathe and drink org charts because of client engagements. Here's an idea of, the red are the people that could be on the mapping team, the green on call, and the purple attend daily briefings. So the question is, well, how did you decide who, this is, a fictional but real client, so it's based on a real engagement. Their VP of Operations was chosen instead of the COO because this was going to be a value stream that was down like one notch from high level view. And the COO had other engagements, and so they could come to the daily briefing. Same with the VP of Engineering and the manager, versus the COO and the VP of Quality. So in this case, we don't have the top level in the organization on the team. Now, I have 2 value stream mapping activities coming up where the entire team are VPs, the entire team. No C level, but all VPs. And that makes for a pretty powerful team. So then in this case, you'll see that it jumps down a couple levels to a manager, so one manager on the team, and also the controller instead of the CFO, and then a director. So you can pick and choose depending on the scope of what you're doing, the objectives of what you're doing, and by the way, those objectives are key to set up front. Look, if you don't like the current state the way it is, what do you want the future state to look like in terms of metrics? What are your measurable target conditions you're going after? And then the on-call people are typically people that you don't need full-time on the team, but they're subject matter experts for a segment of the value stream, and may need to be called upon for a very short amount of time during the mapping. And then there's the daily briefings, which are the purple ones. Of course, the team is there, and the on-call is typically there for the briefings as well. So what's the point of the briefings? Well, briefing number one is to reduce resistance to the future state design. So by getting everyone to clearly see the current state and see the metrics around the current state, that's helping them prepare their minds for what they're going to hear and see with the future state design. So it's a bit of a psychology ploy, I guess you could call it, but it works. It works to get people all saying, yes, yes, we see this and we agree and we see the pain, and yes, please fix it now. That's very different from we have to fix it, why, so they get to see the clarity of the current state, as painful as it may be. On the second day, the briefing is to get consensus around the future state. So what you don't want to have happen is having a future state design that has to be sold after the mapping activity. You want all the right people there in the room and have those difficult conversations and kick the tires during the value stream mapping activity versus waiting until you're about to start executing and then have a bunch of people say, wait, what? No. And the other thing is that selling the future state after the mapping activity, the longer you go from those 3 days together, the harder it is to remember why decisions were made. So it's just not effective at all to have to sell the future state after the current state, after the mapping activity. And then for the third briefing, that's when you're putting together a transformation plan or an action plan, and that's getting full commitment to resources right then and there. Yes, we agree with these priorities. Yes, we're going to commit to the people. Yes, the timeline makes sense to us. Or, no, we can't do it. Let's adjust the timeline. Let's do this. Let's do that. And you get it done right then and there. It's like a Kaizen event where you get improvement made real time, only it's decision making that's real time, and it's high-level decision making. So that's the point of the third briefing. So the next thing after the charter, so briefing dates and times and the people that need to be there are on the charter. After you get that charter done, this is the part that organizations fall down on the most, is socializing the charter, so that it really requires a conversation, not just an email attachment. People don't read their emails. They don't read their attachments for sure. So you need to actually have conversations, and ideally everyone that's going to be affected by change should know what the value stream mapping, what it aims to do, why the team is working on it. And I strongly feel that charters should be physically posted. We've gotten so hung up on putting everything in a computer, and when things are physically posted, people will look, they'll talk, they'll stop a coworker, and it's a much more effective way to engage people in the conversation. And then it needs to be adjusted. So a charter is not necessarily locked in stone. It should be pretty locked down a week or so before the activity, but if by socializing the charter you learn something new, then you absolutely have the right to adjust it. And by the way, talking about scope, back to scope, it is often the case where during value stream mapping, in the 3 days, we're narrowing the scope even further. So you think you've gotten it narrowed enough, and then when the facilitator asks, and then what happens, if the people on the team say, well, that depends. If it's an MRI, on a Wednesday, it goes this way. If it's an MRI on a Sunday, it goes this way. Then you have to sometimes narrow your scope even further in the middle of the mapping activity. You try not to have that happen, but it does happen pretty frequently. So as you're socializing the charter and using it to gain consensus and to deepen understanding and help answer the question why are we doing this, then there could be new insights and discoveries that even all the way down the front lines are giving that could require an adjustment to the charter. So that's the importance of the charter. I mentioned a VSM overview. So this is something where I used to always do the overview at the beginning of the first day of mapping, and I've started doing it in advance now because it gives people a little more comfort level when they walk in on the first day, that they know sort of what to expect. So I do it by webinar for my clients that are long distance, which most of them are. If you're internal and you're facilitating value stream mapping internal, I'd recommend you do it about a week before the activity. And this is the content I include. You can certainly include more than that. It's usually typically an hour, hour and a half at the most, and it's just what are value streams and what value stream maps are, what do they look like, what are they likely going to come out with, what are the benefits and the types of deliverables we'll have as outcomes, and then what to expect. So let's talk about schedule. I don't find there's a way to have a really kind of fine point schedule. You can have a macro schedule, which is day 1, day 2, and day 3. Day 1, current state, day 2, future state, day 3, implementation or execution plan. But beyond that, I can't usually figure it out by hour because it depends on conversation and the discovery process that the team is doing. And rules of engagement are highly recommended. Things like all devices off, we'll take breaks. What's said in the room stays in the room. Use the power of 10 or 8 or whatever to think through not just the knowledge of one person, that type of thing. And then I go through the charter and just make sure everyone on the team understands the charter. For the VSM overview, anyone's allowed to come. In my view, clients can decide that they want only certain people to come. At the very least, it's the team. At the very most, it could be the team, the on-call people, the people coming to briefings, and heck, the entire leadership team. It's a webinar in my case. It could be, a big conference room in your case. And so why not? Why not expose as many people to the process as possible? One more thing I want to mention, going to the Gemba. So we talk in the book about value stream walks. We call them that instead of Gemba walks. And those typically need to be scheduled in advance as well, especially when you have people that are going to be interviewed that do the work, having to engage with leaders for maybe the first time. They need to understand that this isn't a interrogation. They're not on the jury stand. That this is the leaders are coming out of a place of humility and curiosity, and they're asking how work is flowing or not flowing in order to design a future state. So Mike will talk a lot more about that during his webinar, but the orchestration of that and preparation for that needs to happen in this planning stage. So that's a very quick nutshell of the planning stage. So, and feel free, here's the download link for the charter if you want to get a copy of that, and you can modify it to meet your own needs. And if you'd like to get my newsletter or blog, please feel free to subscribe, and you can email me with any of the questions that we don't get through today. And then I think we're ready to go to questions. And so Tony, maybe I don't see the questions, so maybe you could help me by reading the questions?
Yeah, perfect. Karen, while they're entering the questions, I got to tell you, I was nodding in agreement so often, and I just kept saying, amen, amen. Everything you're talking about just hit home of everything from, is this really value stream mapping, or is this just a process flow diagram, to who should be on their team, etc. And I got to tell everyone that's involved with this, that charter is awesome. All right, having used Karen and Mike's charters before in the past, it really helps out tremendously. So even if you didn't think you were a fan of charter, I'm here and I'm endorsing it also.
I think that the sales process of getting leaders to understand why they should be on a mapping team is something worth thinking through in whatever organization the listeners are in, and it often involves a conversation around why mapping at a strategic level makes sense. A lot of people, when they get into the VP and above level, just think mapping's for the other people. And they have to understand that this is very much akin to strategic planning. I mean, it's not strategic planning, but it is a strategic activity. So sometimes I get a lot of questions around that, and how do you convince them that they should be on this team? And it's just a matter of explaining what the outcomes are going to be, and why why spending 3 days will solve problems that they've been dealing with for years.
Okay, and Karen, along those lines, the question came in is, can we focus on one department or our department, or do we have to start higher up?
Well, I think that gets back to the question about sub-optimization. Is all improvement good? I think the answer is yes. All improvement is good. What's missing from that department-specific improvement is connecting it to the larger whole. And so while it's great, like daily Kaizen, for example, is absolutely important to be making micro improvements every day, every place, everywhere, everybody. But when it comes to making substantive change to workflow, department-specific improvements are going to stop once they get to the next department, if they're not connected through a more holistic view of the workflow. So yeah, you can definitely do, and you should do, improvement, but just know that if you're looking at workflow that reaches a customer, the value stream is the way to go.
Okay, great. Here's another question. A distribution center for the Northeast with 7 employees. Can we really do a value stream map for a single location of a global manufacturing company? Or would we just be process mapping?
Good question. So a DC absolutely needs to be part of the consideration with a value stream map. So it may be that you could either try sponsoring it and engaging corporate, or you could lobby to have corporate do value stream mapping, and then you would just be a part of that team and including that whole thing. If you're looking to just improve the operations within the distribution center, then it might be just a process level map. But I think one of the biggest gaps I see is this gap between production and distribution centers and the customer, and that is where the rubber meets the road. And so value stream mapping is a really powerful tool to help connect those two areas.
Okay, Karen, another question was based on whether it's hospital service or manufacturing, is there any other differences in the preparation?
Good question. By the way, they're all good questions. I would say it really depends a little more on the maturity of the organization in looking at work. Have they done a lot of improvement or not, than it does what industry they're at. So for example, I have one client right now that they've never looked at work this way, ever. I mean, they've never measured anything, and they don't even have well-documented processes anywhere. And I can't even get the data on what the customer demand is per year. They just don't even have that. So it's a very different planning process when you're educating a lot and you're sludging through mud to get data, and those kinds of things. That's very different from someone who's been down, who's been to this rodeo before. So that's different. Let me think about other differences. Oh, one more difference is if you're in manufacturing, it's the first time you're tipping your foot into the office side of manufacturing. They just need a lot of prep on why measuring processes matters, and what they're going to gain from it, because they tend to not be very experienced in that area. So that's another thing I would say differs. Walking the value stream is a little bit of a different consideration in healthcare versus manufacturing or any other industry, because if you're going to go into a patient area, you have to be a little more strategic on how to not be intrusive. You still have to walk it, but you can't be intrusive, and you can't break up the team. So it presents some really interesting dilemmas for healthcare on how do you walk, when do you walk, that type of thing. So there's some differences there, I would say, but not in terms of the charter. I would say that it's more logistics and mental preparation that's different.
Okay, that sounds good. Karen, a quick question about it was presented on the earlier slide. Is there information that needs to be collected for that IT interface?
Yes, and usually you get that as you're either physically walking the value stream, or if you, so I just had a value stream mapping activity a couple weeks ago where we couldn't walk much of the value stream because we had operations in India, and Poland, and China, and Thailand and the U.S. and 3 locations in the U.S. And so we couldn't really walk it. So we spent the bulk of our time in the conference room. And as you're mapping out the process using Post-its, on paper in a room, then whatever function or department does process 1, you'll be saying, now what do you enter into, and is there anything that you draw information from? And so we recommend 2 passes across the value stream, or 2 physical walks if you're walking. One is just to get the processes, the blocks, and then the second one is to get all the data, including the IT systems. So the first pass, you're just, what are the processes and what order do they occur and who does them? And then the second one is, what are the metrics, what are the IT systems, what's the WIP, work in process that's queuing up, etc. So that you get it while you're doing that part of the process.
Okay, sounds great, Karen. Let's go ahead and wrap it up. If people have additional questions, what would be the best way to contact you?
My website's probably the best way. It's ksmartin.com, or there's my email address. And I recommend that they explore the website. It's content heavy. There's a lot of free stuff there. And then I guess, yeah, that's about it. Okay. And then this is Mike's. I kept saying February, so Mike's webinar with you is March 13th, right?
Right. So everyone's welcome to sign up for that one. It is active and live on our website. And Mike Oslerling, the co-author of the book, will be going in a little bit more into understanding the current state. So we look forward to seeing you there. All right. And from 5S Supply, right now we do have their book on sale, so you can save 25%. And you can just order it online, and we'll get it to you as quickly as we can. And I would say it's one of the best books out there. I think it's the new standard for value stream mapping. Like Karen mentioned, hey, we all did Learning to See, but this one really takes it to a new level. And, of course, join us on any of our social media, same thing, free downloads, webinars, how-to videos, et cetera, and we look forward to seeing you. And once again, thank you very much for attending today's webinar. And we'll get this recorded and put back up there for you in case you didn't see the whole thing or you want to review it again later. We'll go ahead and end the webinar for today. And once again, thank you very much for attending.